Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. History will be kinder to me, the late Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said over a decade ago. And today, 10 years later, we're judging the former Prime Minister by one of his singularly most important contributions to India, the Indo-US civil nuclear deal. Why is this deal so important? Let me give you some perspective. 50 years ago, India tested nuclear weapons in 1974. The West was horrified. They created an architecture that would punish India for nuclear tests. Sanctions were imposed on India. The US established the Nuclear Suppliers Group, an export control cartel that restricted the transfer of nuclear materials and technology to India. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act stopped nuclear assistance to India. No one could sell us nuclear fuel or technology unless we signed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Of course, India wasn't going to do that. It was faced with a nuclear-armed adversary, China. But in the 1980s, China transferred nuclear weapons designs and uranium and helped Pakistan build a nuclear bomb arsenal. Now, India was now faced with not one, but two nuclear-armed adversaries. There was clearly going to be no way India was going to give up its nuclear weapons program, which is what it had to do if it needed better relations with the West. And so Prime Minister Vajpayee ordered a second round of nuclear tests in 1998. And what followed was still more sanctions. And today we're going to talk about how Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made the Indo-US nuclear deal happen and the transformative impact this one deal has had on the India-US relationship. Joining me from Trivandrum is T.K. Nair, former Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, Nirmal Abraham, foreign policy expert, and in the studio I have with me geopolitical analyst Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Abhijit, why do you believe the Indo-US nuclear deal was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's biggest contribution to India?
So if you look at it, Sandeep, everything else, say he's also remembered with the 1991 economic reforms. But that was entirely on the orders and backing of P.V. Narasimha Rao.
Yes.
That is P.V. Narasimha Rao's legacy.
Right.
That's not Manmohan Singh's legacy.
Yeah.
Manmohan Singh was the consummate bureaucrat.
Right.
He had no personal feelings about anything, unlike a lot of bureaucrats.
Yes.
Not a good thing. He was told what to do and he used to do it to the best of his abilities. When he was told to regulate, he was actually one of the architects of regulation Raj
Absolutely.
and license
during
Raj.
socialist India.
When he was told to
Yes.
deregulate,
Right.
he did it brilliantly.
Right.
Right. So he was the consummate bureaucrat that you had. The nuclear deal was the defining point because
Right.
that was the one time in his entire career
Yes.
he put his foot down and he said, no, I'm not taking orders from the left. I'm not going to go along. I am staking my reputation and credibility on this. That was the one time he refused to take orders. And because he was such a good soldier, because he had
Yes.
that gravitas around him, Sonia Gandhi agreed to it. She gave him the political backing and he put so much effort into it. He said,
Right.
if the left gets out, let them get out. I would much rather have the nuclear deal than have this government. And of course, it was a collective effort because there was
Yes.
the backroom dealings and everything that happened to, win the confidence vote after that and things
Yes.
like that. But that was his baby. Had there been no Manmohan Singh, sure, you can argue had Vajpayee not
Yes.
tested, and then had it not been Jaswant Singh's adept diplomacy in getting those American sanctions to be lifted
Yes.
a year later, we wouldn't be. But this thing that broke India's nuclear sort of containment,
The apartheid
the
that
apartheid,
was
complete
imposed on
apartheid.
us.
It was as momentous
Yes.
as the end of apartheid in South Africa or
Right.
the end of segregation in America. It was as momentous as that. Because at that time, remember, our reactors were functioning at 20%, 30%
Yes.
capacity and things
They were
like that.
literally
People have
starved of
forgotten.
fuel.
They were starved of fuel.
Yes.
Today, we're talking about, hey, you're not giving me the dome technology. I want, the conversations have
Yes.
moved on so far.
Right.
And it was a very, the mental agility it required to come up with that deal.
Yes.
To say, to talk about the bifurcation of our
Civil nuclear,
of our civil
yes,
and military
absolutely.
system, and to ensure supplies
Yes.
to everything coming so that our
Right.
domestic resources could be diverted. On top of that,
Yes.
let's not forget, very shortly after that, it was under the UPA we procured mines in Niger,
Yes.
which now supply both our military and our civil. I mean, we don't admit they supply our military, but they supply pretty much
Yes.
everything. So, you know, it was a sequence of events. Maybe the logical conclusion to that events was to go in rapidly for the construction of nuclear reactors, which
Yes.
did not happen, which I'm hoping will happen with the indigenous, because the indigenous
Right.
development was
So that was going to be my
prioritized.
follow-up question to you, Abhijit. You know, 20 years back, there was this promise of US nuclear reactor technology coming in, foreign nuclear reactor technology coming in. But today, all that we see is a whole lot of American military hardware, $20 billion worth of military hardware,
Yeah.
but no reactor technology.
And there was a very good reason for it. I remember at that time, you know, Manish Tiwari ji had explained it that way. We had a bruising debate, and there was that glint in his eye saying, well, I don't actually believe that. We now know why it happened. He said there was a bruising debate, and that is why, you know, we needed to calm tempers down before we moved on to procurement.
Right.
That wasn't it. Remember, each nuclear technology requires a very specific kind of fuel
Yes.
that is processed a different way. It's a different isotope of uranium or
Right.
whatever you use. The end product is very different and has to be reprocessed a certain way. Reprocessing technology wasn't being offered to us at that point of
Right.
time. So we wanted a standardized Indian reactor to be developed,
Right.
where we create the entire chain around it, the complete supply process
Yes.
with fuel sourced by us, to create economies of scale. Is it slow? Is it painful? Should we criticize it? Yes.
Yes.
Is there a method to the madness? Absolutely there is.
Right. So let me ask Mr. Nair about why Prime Minister Manmohan Singh chose to stake his government and his entire reputation on this one Indo-US nuclear deal. Mr. Nair, why did the Prime Minister go out on a limb, as Abhijit was saying, staked everything, and possibly the first time in his career, he took a very independent line of thinking that was very different from what his party men believed and certainly what his allies, the Communist Party, believed. Why did the Prime Minister go out on a limb on the Indo-US nuclear deal?
Well, the one line answer is because he firmly believed that taking India out of that status of a nuclear pariah
Right.
and take the nuclear technology for the future development of this country was absolutely essential. So
Right.
that's why, as you rightly said, he staked the future of his own government, more importantly for him, his own career as the Prime Minister.
Right. Mr. Rai, you know, you worked very closely with the former Prime Minister. You were literally his confidant. You spent more time with him possibly than any other bureaucrat. What was going on through his mind, you know, when that very momentous vote of confidence happened? The left parties withdrew support to his government in 2007. And you wrote, I read in one of the newspapers today, you wrote that possibly history would have been different if the left parties had continued to stay on in the government. Maybe the second term of the UPA would have been different. What made you say that? Was it something that the former Prime Minister told you?
Well, more than what the former Prime Minister told me, what I observed and what I felt very genuinely was the left parties was a restraining influence on the
Right.
Prime Minister in many respects. And
Yes.
equally importantly, the Prime Minister owed a lot to the late Arghashan Singh Surji,
Yes.
who was one of the greatest supporters. And Arghashan Surji was out of the scene. You know, the relationship between Manmohan Singh
Right.
and the Communist Party, that also went through a process of transformation. So these factors contributed to the withdrawal of support by the left and the consequences that followed. Those consequences may not be very evident, may not have been very loud, did not result in the breakup of the government,
Yes.
but it had a great impact on the functioning of government.
Right. Absolutely. The restraining influence was gone, and possibly that's what he meant when he told you that. But Nirmal Abraham joins us as well. Nirmal, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said, history will judge me kindly, was he referring only to the nuclear deal, or was it any other aspects of the of his government? Of course, as Abhijit said, the reforms which he brought in as the finance minister was actually largely Narasimha Rao's baby, but the Indo-US nuclear deal was entirely his. And I was talking to one of the PMO officials this morning, and he told me it went through 16 rounds of negotiations. And he says, you have no idea how important these negotiations were. They're possibly some of the most far-reaching negotiations that India has conducted with any other country. Yeah. So in the light of what's happened in the last 20 years, you believe that that was the right thing for him to have done at that point?
Absolutely, and one of the reasons he may have said that history will judge him kindly is because for all of these years, even when we speak about other leaders, I think one of the things that we often heard about Manmohan Singh was that he's not a charismatic leader. Nobody calls him a brave leader or a bold leader. So the idea for a lot of people here is that a leader should be someone like a Winston Churchill, who is bold and brave, or a John F. Kennedy, who is young and dashing, or Ronald Reagan, who is humorous and appealing to the crowd. He was none of that. Right. But I think, to me and to every Indian today, I'm glad that every Indian, regardless of where they stand on the political spectrum, they stand today on the belief that Manmohan Singh was right about all the policies he made, the decisions he made, and he was a wonderful negotiator. Know that we think back, because that's how I would define a leader. A leader should be a person who has to have the right and the capability to negotiate, who has to have humility, which he already had, and he was able to bring together people. You just mentioned in 2008 how he brought together the Samajwadi Party. That was great leadership, as well as getting the clean chit and the process. You spoke about the process and the difficulty of that. From 2005, that was when the first discussion of the nuclear deal happened with George W. Bush.
Yes.
And then there were 16 or 17 other rounds of negotiation, the next 36 months that he had to go through to make multiple events happen, including getting a clearance from the NSG, which was really difficult. And number two was even making the United States amend their own domestic law, the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, which was a huge deal because the US government had to go to the Congress to get it signed before George W. Bush left. So I think in those terms, when you look at him as a complete leader, we judge him not only kindly, but we judge him as a brilliant prime minister who laid the foundation for everything that we enjoy today, including the nuclear aspect, the defense aspect, as well as the economic aspect, is what I believe.
Right. Absolutely. Abhijit, I'm going to ask you, because you look at the military so closely. How has Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's decisions on the civil nuclear deal back then, almost 2 decades ago, how has it impacted on our nuclear arsenal? There were experts at that time who said, oh, this is going to stunt our nuclear development. We are not going to have nuclear weapons after this. Our development is going to be corralled and stunted and what. Have any of those fears come true, or?
Look, those were such ludicrous criticisms. I mean, it was very obvious even then. One of the reasons I voted against the BJP in 2009 was precisely because of very stupid arguments like that, which made absolutely no sense if you looked at the balance of what was going to happen with that particular agreement. But, the overall impact it had, was the removing of a host of allied sanctions, on ballistic missile technology and things like
MTCR
that. The MTCR and everything.
Yes.
And what has happened since then is, if you look at our pace of missile, because a nuclear bomb by itself is not very advanced technology. It's about 80-year-old technology.
Yes.
It is making it safe and not pop if it drops off the table. That is the difficult part.
Right.
Delivering it to the target without being intercepted is the even tougher part, right? So it's all the having a nuclear bomb by itself means nothing. It's the delivery and the safety that mean everything.
Right.
So with that one breaking, everything else broke.
Right.
And so you look at the trajectory of our missile development. Till then, it is sort of very even like this.
Yes.
And suddenly after that, it takes such a huge spike in terms of range, in terms of canisterization, in terms of MIRVs, multiple independent re-entry vehicles, where one missile can fire 5-6 nuclear warheads, in terms of submarine-launched ballistic missiles and things. The range of possibilities that opened up were just so massive after that.
Right.
It had a knockdown effect on everything, but also in terms of, the kind of trust it built up with the Americans
Yes.
to the point that where they were willing to share much more sensitive technology with you, because for the first time they said, we've done something good for you, meaningful for you.
Right.
Now you partner with us. You know, that stigma that had been attached to America
Right.
ever since they sent, what was it, the 5th or the 7th Fleet?
The 7th
against us
Fleet in
71.
1971. Right.
It stopped figuring in conversations
Right,
after that.
right.
And so it was also sort of mental, baggage that we lost in that
Right,
sense.
mental baggage that we lost. And in fact, when you mentioned submarine-launched ballistic missiles, Abhijit, I was reminded of the launch of the Arihant in 2009, where Mrs. Gursharan Kaur, of course, cracked the coconut in front of us in that secluded dry dock in Vishakhapatnam. And Prime Minister Manmohan Singh went on to thank the Russians who were there.
Yes.
So very interesting that you had a Prime Minister who everybody would have thought, the Russians would have certainly thought, who is pro-American, but here he was effusively thanking the Russians for their support in making that nuclear submarine. So it tells you of the sagacity of a man who's gone and done the right thing when it comes to the civil nuclear deal, and also he's paying respects to the Russians for helping us with that program.
So, I think he's unfairly seen as the economic prime minister,
Yes.
when in fact he should be seen as the diplomatic prime minister.
Right.
Because he was the guy that fixed our relationships with everyone.
Yes.
Right? He could, what Modi has taken to a next level skill
Yes.
was initiated by Manmohan Singh. I mean,
Yes.
there were always all the restrictions on what he could have done.
Yes.
With Palestine or Israel, for
Yes.
example, because of the party he comes from and the kind of checks and balances, like no domestic politics and
Right.
you focus on this kind of thing. But that sort of true non-alignment that we've moved
Yes.
towards, that was also initiated by Manmohan Singh.
Right.
And he knew that because the Russians didn't have the diplomatic heft to do what the Americans
Yes.
did, he had to
Right.
balance that out with a sort of doff of the hat to the Russians.
Yes.
Because remember, the Russians were willing to help us on military nuclear, which the Americans were
Which
not.
the Americans were not. Mr. Nair, Abhijit just mentioned how a lot of credit goes to former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh for being that the reformer Prime Minister. No one talks about his contributions to making India the nuclear weapons power that it is. Of course, it's a sensitive subject we are talking about, but tell us what he actually felt about India, a nuclear-armed India, India that aspired to be one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council. And he worked very quietly behind the scenes to make sure that our nuclear submarine program, took off, the missile development took off, the nuclear weapons program took off, all of these things. But what was his vision really for India as a nuclear-armed country?
Well, to my mind, he was perhaps not enamored of the idea of a nuclear armed country, in the
Right.
sense that nuclear power that you hold or that you wield would be against any other country. Certainly not. That was far from his mind. He talked about the peaceful uses of nuclear energy.
Yes.
To my mind, those aspects were what were uppermost in his mind. Not that India would be one among the 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever is the grading of the power structure. And again, to my mind, he was very realistic about the fact that armed with nuclear weapons alone,
Yes.
you are not going to be a power like America or Russia or China. He
Right.
was aware of that. The power of the country does not lie only in its military arm. It has got to be, a prosperity and the economic development of the country. And a
Yes.
country which is not economically developed, a country which has a large number of poor people, he knew that that was not good for this country, or that was not his perception of what India should be.
Right, absolutely. But he, at the same time, I must tell you, Mr. Rai, he did push for the nuclear weapons program. A lot of key projects were pushed under his tenure. I know for a fact that the next generation ballistic missile submarines was cleared by his government as well. That what we know as the S5 program, which has just started construction. So a lot of stuff, under his stewardship. Went about very quietly. Of course, Mr. Nair is not going to give us all the details because he's been privy to a lot of very important meetings. But Mr. Nair, again, coming back to this nuclear deal, which is literally his signature moment, that he went out there as Abhijit was saying, that he was a bureaucrat, used to taking orders throughout his life, execute. He's a great implementer, executor, RBI governor, and all of that. But then at the nuclear deal, when it comes, he just, stakes his whole government, his party. He moves against the flow. What was this conviction, apart from the fact that he wanted to end this nuclear apartheid that India was under for almost 4 decades then? What are the other convictions that he really had? Why did India literally have to sign that nuclear deal? Why didn't he, for instance, take the easy way out and listen to what the members of his party were saying? Hey, listen, let's just go on with the way things were before. The Russians could possibly help us. Did he believe that the Americans could offer us what the Russians could not?
Well, to my mind, peaceful uses of nuclear energy for developmental purposes was what was uppermost in his mind.
Right.
That, to my mind, is the straightforward answer. Of course, there are many factors which contribute to a decision making.
Yes.
And there have been, several experts on nuclear energy and the nuclear energy uses, both peaceful and otherwise, who are advising or whose advice he sought and got. There are people like, Chidambaram, Dr.
Yes.
Kakotkar, etc., who did advise him on various aspects of this. So true, he was a quintessential bureaucrat,
Yes.
not in the pejorative sense, but as a man who was very cautious. He did not jump into decisions. He did not take decisions on the spur of the moment. He deliberated on the different aspects of a policy or a project that he was going to take up. So it was the result of a very deliberative process, including large-scale consultation, which led to his conviction that the Indo-US nuclear deal was, worth staking his government. And I
Right.
may also add that, this is based on observation, that the then President Bush was totally with Dr. Manmohan Singh. It was a meeting of minds, if I may say so.
Yes.
And President Bush was extremely keen. Actually, he said it in so many words to his own people that he did not know many things about the technicalities of this, but he would like to see this happen. This was very clear terms President Bush had indicated to his own team in the presence of the Indian Prime Minister.
So, that's another aspect that we haven't dwelt upon, Mr. Nair, the fact that it was George W. Bush who actually offered us that nuclear deal. Do you believe, almost 2 decades later, that had it been any other president, for instance, this deal would not have happened? It actually needed two to tango. You needed Manmohan Singh on this side, and you needed someone who's as radical as George W. Bush in Washington to make this deal happen. How important was George W. Bush in this equation?
Well, I am not a diplomat, and I do not know much about the relationship between India and America before Bush. But it was quite clear that Bush was keen. What was his motivation? I am not able to understand. I did not go into that. Still,
Right.
I do not think about it
Right.
because the decision was so momentous.
Yes.
And the commitment of Bush, the protracted negotiations which went on for years. And I still believe that after the signing of the agreement, the 123 agreement or whatever you call it,
Yes.
the pace at which subsequent developments progressed,
Yes.
in my mind, was slow. They could have been faster. There are many reasons for that. But the fact remains that the process of actual implementation of it in its various facets
Right.
was considerably slow.
Right, absolutely. And of course, the relationship has galloped and it's not, there's no looking back anymore, Abhijit. It's like India has now entered the nuclear department store and it's shopping in a way that it possibly couldn't in previous years. But there we are talking about former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's legacy as a nuclear reformer. We know him as India's economic liberalizer, the finance minister who ushered in economic reforms, of course, under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. But we were just talking about his lasting and singularly greatest contribution to India, which is the Indo-US civil nuclear deal. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Nair, Nirmal Abraham, and of course, my colleague, my friend Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Donald Trump begins his second term in office less than a month from now. He has promised to make America great again, or MAGA, in his second term. Now, at the heart of the MAGA movement are some very significant people of Indian origin. But in the last few days, we've seen a torrent of social media abuse directed at some of these prominent Trump appointees, particularly Sriram Krishnan, Senior Policy Advisor for Artificial Intelligence in the White House. Now, these attacks have come from Laura Loomer. She's a far-right activist and a staunch Donald Trump supporter. She's targeted Indian immigrants, describing them as third world invaders, and they come from a country which she says has an IQ of 70. Has immigration already become a bone of contention among the MAGA faction in the US? And why has H-1B visas become the bone of contention between Trump acolytes? And will this backlash continue past President Trump's inaugural? And most importantly, are these online hate attacks on Indians going to get worse in the days ahead? Joining me is Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Pramit Pal Chaudhary.
Yes, thank you.
Pramit, what's going on in the US right now? There's war within the MAGA, Trump supporters gunning for each other. Make sense of what you see right now on social media, especially the attacks on Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, well, first keep in mind it's social media. There's been no official commentary by anybody of any consequence in the Trump team or by Trump himself. And quite possibly they're not really paying that much attention to this. They're not in power yet officially,
Right.
Not until next month, not another month to go. So I wouldn't get too excited by this. Loomer, as you've mentioned, is a social media influencer, takes very extreme right-wing positions. She's endorsed Trump, if I remember correctly, and has been thing. But Trump has many social media influencers. And the MAGA spectrum, if you wish, incorporates everything from extremist anti-immigrant people to libertarians like Elon Musk, who supports all immigrants. He thinks immigration is a great idea. So what exactly it translates into policy is not clear. Loomer seems to have, if I'm correct, picked up a statement by Krishnan saying that regarding H-1B visas, which are the high-skilled working visas that America issues, a small number every year, bulk of which are taken by Indian IT workers. Within the H-1B visa system, there is a country quota. So he basically says that each country gets a certain quota. And he basically said he feels that country quota should be lifted. In other words, there should be no more country quotas, but the total number of H-1B visa he has no comment about. So she latched onto that and seems to have assumed or deliberately misconstrued that to mean that he wants to basically have unlimited H-1B visas, which he did not say at all.
Right.
And that has triggered in return a long-standing resentment among a group of American tech workers that Indian tech workers under the H-1B visa program end up depressing their salaries or denying them certain kinds of jobs. So therefore, that's sort of brought back an old issue that keeps coming back and has kept coming back over the past at least 25 years, as far as I can remember going back. Hearing these type of things. It's nothing particularly new. It isn't necessarily even MAGA, even though the Democrats have been in power. You may remember that Obama said Buffalo versus Bangalore, that he would prefer the jobs be in Buffalo rather than in Bangalore. John Kerry campaigned also against H-1B, and ironically it was a Republican, George W. Bush, who said, I don't have a problem with that. So it's been around. It's just been picked up in a slightly extreme version in this case.
Right.
What it will reflect in terms of policy yet, we don't know.
Right. So, Abhijit, are these the opening shots of a larger war against H-1B visas, as Pramit was saying, that, Trump has said recently, a few months back, that he's going to allow college grads to get H-1B visas. And obviously, there's a very influential sect within the MAGA supporters who are very worried with this so-called influx of H-1B visas. You see that as snowballing into something more sinister than this?
No, I think this is going to die a very natural death, and I'll tell you why. Remember, the entire MAGA campaign was against illegal immigrants into America. They celebrate legal immigrants into America. Remember, Elon Musk himself is a legal immigrant.
As is Vivek Ramaswamy.
As is Vivek Ramaswamy, right. So, these guys, and let's be clear, they are fringe influencers of Trump. Laura Loomer is a nobody. Mike Chernovich and Jack Posobiec, who are playing neither here nor there. They want to highlight abuse of the H-1B visa system. They're not completely in the Loomer camp as such. These are all people who have been left out of the cabinet. It's very personal for them because they see somebody like Sriram Kari. I'm not body shaming anyone here, but the word used on the internet was, he looks like Frankenstein. That Frankenstein and Vivek Krishnan and Usha Vance, Usha Vance's husband, are getting cabinet slots, and they're not. You saw a lot of this in 2014 as well, where a lot of social media influencers thought that when Modi comes to power, being a social media influencer somehow gets you a cabinet slot. This is a case of sour grapes, and very high self opinions that aren't matched with real life experience. I mean, realistically, what is Laura Loomer going to be in the cabinet for? What is Mike or Jack Posobiec going to be in the cabinet for? Nothing really, right? The second aspect of this is we should remember every right-wing movement, like every left movement, has its loony left. Every right-wing movement has its loony right, which is usually a very thin sliver. This is that thin sliver. The problem is none of this would have made the news had it not been for Indians wanting to react to everything that is said about India. In many ways, we've made it the big news that it is.
But Elon Musk reacted to it as well. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, they all
dismissed it, saying that this lady is she's engagement farming. She's seeking a reaction. Just ignore her. He took away her blue tick. I don't agree with taking away the blue tick and the monetization, but he did that nevertheless, right? So this is not going to be an issue. The American experience celebrates. It is an immigrant culture. They celebrate the
American
coming
dream.
in for the American dream to make America a better place and to make their own lot better, right? So this thing that they're coming in for third world countries or whatever, it's not something that resonates with anybody in America, really.
It doesn't resonate with anyone. I'm going to ask Surinder Lali this. Surinder, you've been tracking the social media war that's on, as Abhijit was saying. The spectrum of the MAGA is at war. There's a far right, and of course there's a center of right, which is attacking them as well. But how do you see this debate playing out in the months ahead? Is H-1B visa going to be back in the news again, given the fact that the Trump administration has a very favorable view on H-1B, increasing the number of H-1B visas perhaps?
Thank you, Sandeep. And I wouldn't worry about it much. And let me tell you, I went to school and college in the United States, and not just in the US, but I went to college in the state of South Carolina. And, Charleston was where all the slaves were brought and the Civil War that started. So, and on top of that, I was in a absolutely white fraternity. I'm a Pi Kappa Phi. So I've been witnessing this off and on for the last 30 some years because I still keep going back. And earlier it was more to do with just, racial profiling in terms of brown skin. And back in the 90s, there was also a gang called the Dot Busters in New Jersey who would simply go out and harm Indian women who wore darts in their head. But that is a time when we were only, limited to owning gas stations and motels. But now Indians are all over the place.
They're the most prosperous immigrant community in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, after the Jews, we're the highest per capita income, and yes. So, I wouldn't worry about it much. And somewhere that question itself is a bit ironical because Donald Trump really stood for anti-immigration and a lot of anti-immigration. I'm surprised that Elon Musk was also kind of brushed with the same, stroke. But a lot of anti-immigration in the U.S. is to do with people with with dark skin. Now, the
Yes.
Mexicans who come across the border come for just menial jobs, and the Indians are, today getting into the positions of power, right from NASA to Lockheed Martin to
Right.
Shell,
Right.
to Boeing. So I wouldn't take, because, what does it take to go on social media and start, talking shit? I'm sorry to say that.
Yes.
So I wouldn't worry. And the way now Indians are coming into a position of power, especially being visible, we're a very strong lobby, a lot of congressmen, and the way Donald Trump is hiring these people.
Yes.
So somewhere it's pretty much like the situation where Elon Musk has most of his business in China, and yet he's part of the Donald Trump's, new team, and probably the next George Soros in the making. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But I wouldn't worry about it much, because if anything, I'd wear it as a badge of honor, because I'm not going to worry about people who are probably insecure on that, not that much of consequence, because they couldn't do much in their own country, and then we could travel 12,000 miles away and make a future for ourselves, and contribute to the American economy. I mean, imagine
Yes.
if there were no Indians, where would Silicon Valley be, or where would NASA be, or where would Lockheed Martin or Boeing, or a lot of these companies would be. So for me, I take it as a compliment.
Pramit, this we've seen a large number of people of Indian origin in the Trump cabinet. What, 5 appointments there, including the director of the FBI. It's possibly the largest number of Indian Americans that we've seen in any U.S. government. What is this board actually for Indo-U.S. ties? Are you going to see a more appreciative government there, given the fact that you have people like Kash Patel in the FBI, whose views on India are very well known?
Yes, one of the interesting things we've seen in the Republican Party is that the Indian Americans have proven to be one of the more active and vocal minority populations.
Right.
If you look at two governors, Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, Nikki Haley in South Carolina, the 2 first Indian American governors were both Republicans. And we've seen an unusually large number of Indian Americans and Asian Americans in general in the Republican Party, even though the bulk of Indian Americans vote in favor of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
That figure has been shrinking a bit. So you have an interesting space that has developed there. And because they're so highly educated, and the most highly educated minority ethnic population in the country, they will automatically be important in terms of both their intellectual capacity,
yes,
as well as their financial donations, because as has been mentioned, we are either the number 1 Indian Americans, or either the 1 or 2 the richest, wealthiest ethnic group in most years. So as a consequence, within the Republican Party, they've been very powerful. What has been interesting in the Trump administration has been the marriage of Silicon Valley, which has traditionally been very liberal-minded, the tech sector has traditionally been Democratic supporters. They have become very closely linked, or large chunks of it, with the Trump administration, in partly a response, I would argue, their belief that the Democrats have sort of lost track of what they should be doing, especially when it comes to the economy and tech regulation and so on. And that has resulted in people like Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, and as you know, an unusually large number of billionaires and centillionaires into the Trump administration, many with a tech background. It helps that Trump admires those type of people.
Right.
He's not really interested in he doesn't see any reason to be concerned about whether a person has a working class background and so on. He's a businessman. He likes businessmen. He thinks that they're the guys who get things done. So that combination has resulted in an unusually large number of Indian Americans. And what is also going to be interesting, because we've seen this now for 3 administrations in a row, many ways, in fact, you can go back to the George W. Bush administration, has been a rise of a strategic technology relationship between India and the United States.
Yes.
A belief by both sides, especially by the Americans, that creating or building up India as a technology partner is both commercially important to the United States, as well as strategically important in facing a common enemy, which is the rise of China, which is very clearly determined to be the dominant technology power in the 21st century.
Right,
And
absolutely.
Silicon Valley and the Indian American community show that this works. They can actually show on the ground that here you have a group of people who have shown that they can combine India and the United States in the technology sector.
Right. Indian Americans in Silicon Valley, and Abhijit, this is looking at the names of the CEOs of key Indian origin CEOs in Silicon Valley: Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Neil Mohan, Shantanu Narayan. You think this is deliberate, that they are all headed by Indian Americans? The fact that Silicon Valley, which is like this veritable arm of the US government now in this war against China, the fact that Indian Americans are there, that's a very strong message that the United States is sending out.
So it's not just Indian Americans, it's Hindu Americans specifically. Because let's not forget, one very important part who's going to be Director of National Intelligence is Tulsi Gabbard, who's not ethnically Indian, but she is a Hindu, a very devout Hindu at that.
The second most important person in the US
the second most important person.
intelligence
and this is one of those, those confluence of the stars, as astrologers like to call it.
Right.
Because what's happened is, remember, Trump was screwed over in his first term by tech.
Right.
He also passed the enabling laws that allowed tech to deplatform, debank, and do things like that, which he fell victim to after Jan 6th, right? And the sort of concerted tech, infotech campaign you saw against him. He has now out-teched tech. He has used tech against tech.
Right.
Let's face it, how much of this would have been possible had it not been for Elon Musk buying Twitter, which is now called X, right? So he sort of used them against them. The second thing is, with Hindu Americans, one of the very important things is the Democrat Party is saturated with minorities. First and foremost, they're the blacks, but then second, there's also the Latino vote. Even though Florida does not tend to vote Democrat, there is a very significant Latino voting population that votes Democrat. So Hindu Indians were always going to be in very severe competition. There is a reason that the first Indian American governors were from the Republicans. They were never going to be from the Democrats because there's no room for Indians up there because of black and Latino politics out there. And the Indians just don't have the sort of congregational power that blacks and Latinos have. So it was very natural for this to happen with the Republican Party. At the same time, like Pramit pointed out, most Indians tend to vote Democrat. Yet, this time, the shift to Republicans has been massive. It's still not a majority, but it's been massive. The shift in voting patterns in New York and California, even though they still remain blue states, has been very significantly towards Republicans and Trump. So you're looking at that sort of perfect confluence happening out there. And obviously, in all of this, people were going to get, how is it that one ethnic minority is getting so much? And Laura Loomer keeps, for example, repeating the fact that she's Jewish as if somehow it shields her from attack. And at the same time, she says, we built this country. I'm sorry, it was white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. There was still
West
discrimination.
America,
there was still discrimination against Jews till about 100 years back. They were called kikes till not till the 1920s, 30s, even till the 40s. The Sulzbergers actually had to play down, the owners of the New York Times, they had to play down the Holocaust because they wanted to fit in with white people. At the same time, there's been the whiteization of minorities out there. Initially, Jews were not seen as white, Catholics, so Italians and Irish were not seen as white. Then they became white and the Jews were not white. Then the Jews became white, and I guess this is the whiteification. I don't know if it's the whiteification of Indians, but it's sort of the same trajectory, and that's where a lot of the hate also comes from.
So is this Surinder, this point that Abhijit made, very interesting, whiteification of America, and is that one of the reasons that Indian Americans are suddenly so prominent? They're everywhere. They're of course all over Silicon Valley, and now they're in the White House. They're occupying very important positions of power. Is this what we're going to see in the next 4 years? That you're going to see Indian Americans emerge as objects of envy, and from guys who haven't managed to get into power, as Abhijit was saying. And so, what's your advice there? Grow a thick skin, or what? Move on.
Thank you, Sandeep. And America is a melting pot, so I guess the whiteification or the brownification is going to change with time, because a lot of millionaires now you see on the east and the west coast are not really whites. But having said that, I'll park another point about the other perception which prevails all over the U.S. more than this little fringe, rogues who nourish hatred is. There is a stand-up comedian called Gabriela Iglesias, and I'd gone to see his show about 3 years ago. And he says something very hilarious, and that ought to give you an idea of what the majority of Americans feel about us. He talks about how subtle and, how Indians are very, into their own lives, and they mind their own family business, and they don't kind of, amalgamate much into the American way of life. But he talks about two Indians who go to rob a bank.
Right.
And when they come back, and one Indian comes back with a computer in his hand, and the other, his other partner says, "You were supposed to rob a bank. Why did you bring this computer back home?" He goes, "I kept telling them that I'm here to rob a bank. They said, no. You are from tech support, so you need to fix our system." So that's what the majority of Americans. There isn't any American who wouldn't have a good doctor or somebody, a good computer guy, or somebody from academia not being in touch with them, because we're all over the place.
Yeah, we're all over the place indeed, Surinder, and thanks for highlighting that. And I think, as they said about the Indian diaspora in the United States, that they're everywhere except, like the Jews, they're everywhere except in organized crime. So that's the Indian-American dream for you there, and it's not going away in a hurry. And we're going to see that, more of that, possibly after Donald Trump is inaugurated on the 20th of Jan. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Surinder Lali, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, and my friend Abhijit Iyer.